Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm, and I will be your host. So today we're joined with Mike Cobb. Hey, Mike.
Hey, Kirk, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. Glad to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
Nice to be back. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Well, for those of you who don't know Mike, Mike's a good friend of mine, and Mike, can you give us a little bit about your background? Because I think that'll help the listeners understand where we're going here.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, went to college in Western Pennsylvania right after school, moved to the DC area and was in the computer business from 1986 to 1998, which was a great time to be in the PC business. I got lucky. I was a poli-sci major in college, so I didn't know anything about computers, but I got in on the PC side of things and was very, very fortunate, again, luck, to be on that side of the business, but great timing. Obviously, this was the PC revolution, right? This was when millionaires and billionaires were made on the PC side of things. Sadly, I didn't make either of those categories, but I did very.
But I did PC is personal computer, by the way, not political correctness.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Kirk. That's right. Personal computers, right? But I did very well for myself over the years. But by the mid 90s, I was actually starting to, take some vacations down south. A good buddy of mine who I think's been on your show, Joel Nagel, he and I were college buddies, and he took me to Belize. He's a lawyer. He was doing a bunch of asset protection work for physicians. And, I went down with him and loved it. And this was late 93, 94, that sort of the winter of 93, 94, and started to see business opportunities. We actually started a little mortgage company in 1994 in Belize to help folks from North America buy properties in Belize. Ultimately, it expanded and we grew that business, and we're all over the region and actually turned it into a bank, Kirk. So that business. But by 1996, we started to see some real estate development opportunities. First couple of years, with just kind of looking around. But by 98, I left the computer business and we started the company. Well, actually, 96 is when we started ECI. 1998, we bought our first property in Belize. 2000, we bought our Grand Pacifica property, then followed by Costa Rica, Panama. So for the last 26 years, we've built a development company that we build resort communities for North Americans throughout the region. We're 26 years old this year, and it's been a great run, man. And I'm really happy that we're on here to talk about. By the way, we can talk about real estate development if you want to, but there are lots of other things that relate to overseas offshore investment, due diligence. There are lots of topics that kind of weave and blend into this. I was an expat. I lived in Nicaragua for 14 years with my family. We moved there with a 2-year-old daughter and raised a family there. So I've been an expat experientially. I know what it's like to pack up all your stuff and move to a foreign country. Then moved back about 5 years ago. Obviously doing business down in the region, several different businesses over the years. So anyway, we can talk about a lot of different things, but I want to make sure that what we talk about is relevant to your listeners and things that will be interesting for them.
Yeah, I can't imagine what it'd be like to pack up all your stuff and move. I mean, I'm just packing up my stuff to move houses, nonetheless, to a different country. So tell us a little bit about that. Like, what is that like? What should people be thinking about if they're thinking of, packing up and moving to a different country?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because we thought we were going to go for 2 or 3 years. That was what, my wife and I talked about. Hey, let's move to Nicaragua, get our Grand Pacifica community started. We figured we'd be there 2-3 years. And what was interesting is after about 3 years, we had everything set up. I had architects, engineers, accountants, marketing people, admin people. We'd actually even hired a chief operating officer to run the business at that point. And Carol and I went out to dinner. And we said, do we want to stay in Nicaragua? Do we want to move back to Shepherdstown, West Virginia, which is where I am today? This is our home. And because we thought it was going to be a couple-year adventure, we rented the house, so it was rented. But 3 years into it, we decided that we would stay a while longer. And we didn't know what a while was going to be. We had another little daughter, Emily, who came along, and we were there for a total of 14 years, 11 of them totally by choice. We ended up coming back to the States because our daughter, our oldest daughter, when she was 15, got an incredible opportunity to study dance, a classical ballet program with the Joffrey in New York City. And so she went to New York City, and we quickly followed back to the States because Mama Bear was not living in Nicaragua with Baby Bear in New York City. That wasn't happening. And where we're about 4-hour drive from New York City where we are. So, But, good question about moving our stuff. We in our heads, we kind of thought, oh, we're moving there for a little while. So we didn't actually move all of our stuff. We took some of the stuff out of the house and we put it in storage, but we had rented a home. So we took a lot. I mean, we took our beds, couches. I mean, we took kind of most everything. I can remember we backed up a 40-foot container. They dropped it in our yard and said, we're coming back in 3 days to pick it up. So we loaded ourselves. So Carol had packed up everything. We loaded it in the 40-foot container. We had the tow truck guys come over and do a car lift, and we drove our Honda CRV into the back of it. We put a mattress on either side. We strapped it down, but put a mattress on either side, closed it up, and they drove it away and shipped it to Nicaragua. One hack. Let me just give one piece of advice on this. Carol did this right. She had read some stuff about it. When she packed, say, our dishes, and she wrapped the plate in a t-shirt, right, and put it in a box. Like, you have to number the box, you have to put paperwork on the box. It needs to be in English and Spanish and on and on and on. But the key thing that somebody mentioned, and she picked up on it, was so important, is that box, yes, it has 10 plates, but it also has 10 t-shirts, or 10 t-shirts and 4 socks, or whatever it was, right? And so that is the hack. If you're shipping stuff overseas and you pack things with something other than, say, newspaper, then you need to list those items on the paperwork as well. And it actually made our customs process in Nicaragua almost perfectly smooth. The car was the one thing where they gave us a hard time, but other than the car, everything was delivered to our home within 2-3 days of it arriving in Nicaragua, which was great. Our car took 2 or 3 weeks, but other than that, it was pretty smooth process, Kirk.
Nice. Yeah, I remember last time you were on the show, you had one of those comments to me about, I said, what are the surprises people had? And you're like, well, how about hot water?
How about hot water?
So, yeah. I mean, that's good knowledge for sure. I think given COVID and all that's gone on in the world in the last few years, COVID's changed a lot. And I think there are a lot of people who are frustrated with, the way things are going in this country. No matter what you believe politically, I think everyone's kind of upset at one thing or another.
Yeah, right.
And I think I've gotten a lot of questions from clients and other people, listeners of the show, who are like, hey, I don't like what's going on here. I'm thinking of moving to a different country. Yeah. Where should people start if that's where they're thinking if they're thinking of, even if they're considering it, even if it's just like a second citizenship or even just having a second home in another country, like where should people start?
Sure. May I kind of take that and split it into 2 parts? Because you mentioned COVID is one thing, and then you mentioned sort of the dissatisfaction on the other. And I just want to start with the COVID because, this is such a big picture thing. And I'm not sure if you and I talked about it or not when we were in President's Week last year. This idea, this is a profound shift in society, right? I mean, for the first time in human history, I mean, this is big stuff. First time in human history, work and the location of work for many people has been decoupled, right? This is truly the beginning of the remote revolution. It is truly a remote revolution, right? So we had people way back, 15,000 years, we had, the caveman, hunter-gatherers, right? But if you were a caveman, you need to kill the bear. You had to go kill the bear. You had to be there, right? Or if you were out picking berries, you had to be there to pick the berries. But then we had this agricultural revolution, right? 15,000 years ago, people started to settle, grow things, but you still had to be there to tend the gardens, tend the flocks. I mean, right? So you had that. Then you had the Industrial Revolution, right? And so in the late 1700s, early 1800s, but people still had to physically go to a factory and operate a machine, right? So again, work and the location of work were coupled all the way through. Then in the 1970s, this guy Daniel Bell coined the term in the late 60s, post-industrial revolution. And people like Nesbitt and Toffler, with their famous books, Future Shock and stuff like that. I mean, they picked up on this idea. Wow, we got this post-industrial revolution, right? But from a management and cultural perspective, social and management culturally perspective, nothing changed. I mean, I remember when I was in computer business from 1986 to 1998 in the DC area, right, in Northern Virginia. I would literally get in my car and drive an hour or more some mornings to go to my office and do this all day. Like, why am I wasting 2 hours of my life in a car each way when I do this all day at work, right? The reason is that culturally, we were still using industrial management philosophy. Frederick Winslow Taylor came up with it when he helped Ford out. I mean, a lot of that industrial scientific management stuff, right? So we had this idea in our head, this is how management must be. And if you were a manager, you would never let your people work from home because, of course, they're watching Game of Thrones all day, right? They're not working, right? But if you were an employee, you weren't asking to work from home because A, they might think you were a slouch, but B, if it was between you and somebody else for a promotion, or they're going to give it to the guy in the office, right? I mean, this was the management philosophy. Well, COVID hits, everyone's sent home, or most people are sent home, right? And all of a sudden, this cultural management system paradigm is broken, and productivity went up. Almost all studies. There are a few studies that show it's flat or maybe a little bit less in some cases, but almost every survey that's out there by big people, McKinsey and Ernst & Young, I mean, the big names out there doing these surveys, productivity is up. What's interesting is quality time is up. So maybe I give the 1 hour of my 2-hour commute every day to the office, and I give the other hour to my family. It's win-win. Everybody wins. The family wins and the office wins, right? So productivity is up, quality time is up. And so, I mean, a few companies are like, we're making people come back. I'll tell you what, people are quitting. I mean, I read this stuff. My company, not my company, but because we've been a remote company for 26 years, Kirk, when this whole thing happened, like, it didn't change our business model one bit. I've got people in Belize, Nicaragua, Panama, Costa Rica. I've got people in Mexico. I've got a woman in Dubai and a man in Portugal that all work full time for the company. We've been a remote company for 26 years, right? But many companies are trying to make their people come back. Not happening. I mean, they might try and a few people might go back, whatever. But many of these folks who are part of the remote revolution have just said, enough. I can work from home. But here's the really cool thing, Kirk, and this is our business, probably about 40%. I'm close on that number. 40% of our business in the last 3 years since COVID lockdown freed up, right? Since the end of the lockdowns, right? 40% of our business has been digital nomads, remote workers. And stereotypically, we think of, whatever, kids in their 30s, right? It's people in their 50s or 60s who are saying, you know what? I thought I was going to wait till I retire to move to, Costa Rica or Belize. I love to go surfing. I love to go diving or snorkeling or fly fishing, whatever it is, right? I love this stuff. And I've got to wait until I'm 65 or 68 or 70 to do it. No. A lot of these folks are saying, you know what? I can go fly fishing every morning and I can be back to the office, my house, my computer at 8 o'clock, right? And I can work a full day and I can go fly fishing on Saturday. I don't have to drive anywhere. I just literally walk to the backside of the island, jump in a flat bottom boat and go fly fishing, right? And so we've got this remote revolution. And yes, there are a lot of 30 somethings, right? 40 something, 50 somethings, but there are a lot of 50 and 60 somethings who are pushing ahead this notion of retirement location and getting all of the joy of that experience before they retire. So it's exciting, Kirk. It is really exciting. And I like to say that because this is like the first time in human history, this is as big as the Industrial Revolution. Think about the economic and political shakeups, that occurred when the Industrial Revolution happened, right? I mean, you had the United States itself is a product of the Industrial Revolution, right? What was happening in England with the rise of the merchant class and the rise of the middle class, right? That started to break apart this whole aristocracy. And you had a bunch of those people moving to the United States or the colonies, I guess, the New World, whatever at the time, right? But they're moving over here and they're saying, you know what? We're going to set up a system of economics and a system of government based on economics and capitalism and free market, as opposed to this old aristocracy model. And so the United States is an incredible product of the Industrial Revolution. It's a product of other things too, right? I mean, you had the philosophers, John Stuart Mill and others that talked about this stuff. But we are just scraping the brown skin off the onion on this true post-industrial revolution. And the decoupling of work and the location of work. There are going to be incredible societal changes that occur, and not all of them will be pleasant. I mean, truly, not all of them will be pleasant. I mean, some are going to be very unpleasant, right? But all in all, I'm very, very optimistic about this big societal change that you and I are living through. Wow. I mean, wow, we're living through this, Kirk. It's exciting, man. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that in a minute because I think there's a lot of opportunities there. But yeah, I think it's funny that, you know, the companies that should benefit from this most, like the tech companies, like Fang Stocks, for instance, some of those big tech companies, they're the ones that are fighting against it the most. I mean, you hear like,
Right.
oh, we're gonna have our workers go back to work, and then 2 weeks later, yeah, we're gonna extend our remote working. Apparently, the backlash has been significant. But
Right.
you know,
They got 5,000 resignation emails, right? Yeah.
yeah, well, I mean, look, if you do something for 2 years, that's a new habit. So
Right.
you're working at home for 2 years, that's a habit. You're not going to want to go
Yeah.
work back. I literally live 5 minutes from my office, and I never go to my office. Like, I can work
Right.
from home. I can see my kids. I mean, I guess
Yep.
when they go to school, it's different. They'll probably go
Yeah.
back, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, it's like I can see my wife, see my kids, my dogs. Like,
Yep.
why am I going to the office? You know, like, is it better there? Well, maybe, but it's like, what's the quality of life that I'm getting from it? So
Yep.
I totally agree with you. So, you know, obviously that's a big trend. It's a huge
Yes.
trend. So where does
Huge.
that lead? Where are some opportunities for people, like you said, you know, fly fishing off your back, off your back porch, but
Yeah.
what are some of the opportunities you see that people can kind of take advantage of, knowing that, hey, I can just work from anywhere?
Yeah. Well, you started into that with the second part. That's why I want to kind of bifurcate the question, right? This idea of getting second residency, because I think many U.S. and Canadians, I throw Canadians into this too. U.S. and Canadians,
They're people too.
They are people. They're very nice people.
Very nice.
Very nice people. This notion of I can leave anytime I want. By the way, the people on the left are absolutely dissatisfied with the people on the right. The people on the right are dissatisfied with the left, and the people in the middle are dissatisfied with both extremes. So you got this, you got this incredible dissatisfaction. I just had lunch with a lady yesterday who's becoming one of our shareholders. She happens to live in Northern Virginia. I'm about an hour and a half west, so we met in the middle for lunch. And I always like to meet all the people who are asking to become one of our shareholders in our company. And for COVID, I didn't meet a few of them in person, but almost every single person who is a shareholder of our company, I've met in person. So I met this woman, Carol, yesterday for lunch in Leesburg, Virginia. And what was interesting is she's right in the middle. She's the person in the middle who's disgusted with both ends, and she's looking to move to the tropical highlands. I'll just mention that as a climate type, the tropical highlands, right? People think of the tropics stereotypically. They think of that, that white sand beach, palm trees, and 16 colors of blue water out in front of you, right? That's what people imagine when they think tropics. But the really cool thing about the tropics is you've got almost every single geography. Yes, you have Caribbean palm trees and white sand. You've got big waves, Pacific Ocean, think Southern California climate, running along the western side of Central America. Then you've got the highlands, which is where they grow coffee, say 4,000 to about 8,000 feet above sea level, where I call it springtime all the time. That's my best weather that I love personally, springtime all the time. And so she's thinking about Medellin, Colombia, or Cuenca, Ecuador. Both are cities that sit, Cuenca's a little bit higher. Cuenca's about 8,000 feet. Medellin's about 4,000, 4,500 feet above sea level, right? But in the tropics, the temperatures and Cuenca's right on the equator, Medellin's a little bit north, right? But the temperature in Medellin, Colombia is, I don't know, 65 at night, 80, 85 in the day, every day of the year. Temperature in Cuenca, it's about 8,000 feet, but it's a little close on the equator, very close. Temperatures there are high 50s, low 60s at night, high 70s, maybe low 80s in the day, every day of the year, right? So it's springtime all the time. And Medellin is a 4.5 million, very modern city, beautiful. I mean, people think Medellin, oh, it's Colombia, but whatever, it's not, right? I mean, we can talk about safety later, but Cuenca is this 500,000 person old colonial city. The city's like 400 years old. So you've got these two magnificent cities, one modern and new, one ancient and colonial, that's springtime all the time. And she's considering one of those two locations as her location, but she's down the middle. She's disgusted with both ends of the spectrum. We've seen people on the left coming down who are disgusted with the right. We see people on the right who are disgusted with the left. People are leaving. And the thing to remember is this idea of residency. Again, we're very fortunate as US and Canadians. We can get on a plane, we can fly to 100 countries around the world, literally walk in without a visa, right? They just say, hey, welcome to whatever, Colombia, welcome to Jamaica, welcome to wherever, and they stamp your passport with a tourist visa. And it gives you 30, 60, 90 days. The problem is at the end of that time period, whatever that period is, like you got to leave, because it's a tourist visa. It's not a residency, right? It's not. And so one of the things that we've helped literally hundreds, we might be over 1,000 now, I should probably get the count, but hundreds, many hundreds of people over the years is with a second residency. Think green card in the US. People who are coming from outside the United States coming to the US, they want a green card, right? That's what they want. They want the permission to legally live in the United States. Well, every country has its version of the green card. And that's what we help people get when they go overseas. A lot of them are tied to retirement, called pensionado visas. Some of them are investor visas where you qualify by making an investment. And some are just, they're neither. They're just sort of a general residency. Some countries truly want you to come live in their country because you're going to spend 5 to 10 times just living normal what the average citizen spends. So you're like this perpetual tourist, right? If you have an income of $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month and you spend any decent part of that, like you're spending probably 5 to 10 times what that local person would spend in the economy at the grocery store, gas station, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of countries have just opened it up and said, we just want you to come and become a resident. So they've created these very easy programs to become a resident of these countries. And we help people do that. So yes, we're a developer. Yes, we build homes and condos and people do own those. But many people are picking up a second residency overseas even before they own the property in preparation of ownership of a property or as a plan B. A lot of people actually, especially on the outsides, the left and the far right, the folks there tend to be thinking about plan B. Like if stuff really goes off the rails, and I think I can kind of see how it could, right? Whether it will or not, I don't know. But I mean, certain things are lining up that if just a few more things happen, a few more dominoes fall in either direction, right? I mean, like things could go really off the rails. And wouldn't it be nice to have a residency overseas that you can have in your pocket, like this one right here, which I'm pulling out of my wallet right now. This is actually a residency card. I'm a permanent resident of the country of Nicaragua. If things go off the rails in the US, I'm packing up, I'm taking my family down to Nicaragua, and I can live there for as long as I want, all the way through the rest of my life. It's a permanent residency. And so, yeah, Kirk, we're seeing a lot of people pick that up as well as sort of what I call liberty insurance. I mean, it's look, I mean, Kirk, you're in the asset protection, you're in the wealth business, right? And a lot of people think about asset protection as protection of stuff, right? I gotta put my stocks and bonds and my real estate and all that stuff in a trust, in an asset protection trust, which smart. I think it's great. It's prudent, right? Smart and prudent. But the most important asset we have is us, like this physical body, right? It's us. That's the most important asset. Presumably, unless you were born wealthy to a family office or something, you've created that wealth. This asset created the assets that you're now protecting inside an asset protection trust. So truly, a second residency is asset protection for the most important asset we have, our physical selves, liberty insurance. And again, we've helped hundreds and hundreds of people obtain that over the years, because I think people see the need and see the importance and the prudence of it, right? It's yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that context. I think that's important. We, like you said, we work with a lot of clients with wealth management, but we talk a lot about in the show risk management. And risk management,
yeah.
Most people think, oh, risk management, you're talking about my portfolio. I'm like, yeah, that's one piece of it.
Yep.
There's so many other pieces you mentioned, asset protection or just person protection, right? Like,
yeah,
if you think we're going into a civil war, I don't, but a lot of people think that, they feel like it's getting to that point. I think we're a far cry from that. It could happen, but I think we're a while away before that becomes an issue.
Right.
But let's say that does happen. I don't want my kids going to war. Like, I don't want them fighting in a war. I would definitely look for plan B. And I think, I think the hard part for a lot of people is you're talking about uprooting their whole life. Like, people like stability. They like
Yeah.
knowing that there's a stability in their life that they can rely on. And, it's hard. When COVID hit, we picked up one weekend. I was like, this is not going away. I
Yeah.
heard what they were saying. Like, really, we're going to stay home for a week and it's going to go away. That's not how it works. So
Oh,
we uprooted, we rented a house down the beach for 3 months
okay.
and we stayed there. And it was the best thing we ever did.
Yeah.
And it was hard, but we made it happen because I didn't know it was going to happen. I didn't know if they're going to force people to stay in their homes. I'm like, well, if I got to do that, I'd rather be at the beach, rather than live in the city.
No. So smart man. Right.
So I think but a lot of that comes to mental preparation.
Yeah.
And so, kind of getting back to the preparation part is, so this is obviously not a small thing for most people. So what do you recommend? Is there like a checklist, or how do you help people through that transition, to understand that it's really not as big of a deal as you think? It may take a little time, but it's something it's worth doing. So how do you kind of explain to people that this is not that hard to do?
Yeah. Well, look, a couple things. One, you mentioned, people like stability and uprooting your family and doing all kinds of stuff, right? Just having this in your wallet or your purse, right, is almost no work at all, right? And it's very inexpensive too, right? So it's an inexpensive peace of mind. And look, I'm not worried about a civil war either, right? I think that it could happen. I mean, pretty much anything could happen, right? But I'm not worried about it. But as you said, there are people who are worried about it. And if having a second residency outside your home country gives you peace of mind and lets you sleep better, and I'm not talking about doing it, I'm not moving any of the stuff behind me, right? I haven't moved any of it, right? Like, literally all I have is a residency card that gives me permission to live in Nicaragua for the rest of my life if I want to. If I do or not, that's a whole different thing. And if I do decide to move there, then yes, it is packing up and, blah, 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 right? But just to have that and sleep better at night, well, that's peace of mind. And so I think that's why a lot of people have literally just gotten the residency card or the residency without even buying property or certainly moving to the foreign country, right? So it's truly just insurance. It's, look, and I always joke around, like, I have health insurance, and I don't hope that I have a heart attack tomorrow to get the best value out of this health insurance money I'm spending, right?
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
No, I really hope that I've wasted all my insurance money. Like, I hope I live a very healthy life and that was all wasted money. Yay, I'll be happy, right? But if I have a heart attack, or if there is civil discord, right? I don't know if it'd be always civil war, but massive civil discord, right? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go to the beach for 3 months, or I'm going to go to Panama for a year, or I'm going to go to Costa Rica for a year, or whatever it is, right? Just having that option available to you is peace of mind. And I think that's why a lot of people have done this. Literally tens of thousands of people have done it. And I know we've helped in the high hundreds of people do it ourselves as our company. Moving overseas, it is a big decision, and it's not one to be taken lightly. And this is going to sound crazy, Kirk, coming from a guy who built a development company who builds and sells real estate. My biggest advice, I give this on the stage. I speak at 30, 40 conferences a year, and I give this advice from the stage, depending on the topic I'm talking about. Rent before you buy. Rent for 3 to 6 months before you buy something, if it's a lifestyle decision, right? I think investment is different. Investment's a head decision. We can run the numbers, we can do the calculations, ROI. Okay, we don't need to rent somewhere for buying an investment property, right? Like, if you're buying a duplex in Memphis, Tennessee, you don't need to go live there to see if you want to buy it as an investment property. But if you're thinking about moving to Memphis, Tennessee, like, I would recommend rent in Memphis before you buy there too, right? So same thing overseas, rent before you buy. And that's really simple advice that's sound advice. And coming from the real estate developer, me, I can assure you that if you rent one of our beautiful homes or condominiums in one of the communities we've built and you hate it, I want you gone. I do. I want you gone. And I want you happy. What I really want is I want you happy. And if you're not happy in our community, please go find a community where you will be happy, right? But if you are happy, well, then you'll probably decide you want to own something in our community. And I need sales 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 6 years from now. We've been around for 26 years. So, we've been doing this a long time. So rent before you buy is absolutely fundamental for a lifestyle decision. As far as I'm concerned, investment decisions are very different. We have a beautiful Best Western condo community that we've built and are continuing to build in Belize on Ambergris Key. And these are studio residences in a Best Western branded condo hotel that are under $150,000, right? We have, I would say that 80%, I'm close on that, probably, maybe 90%, whatever. 80+% of the people who own those own them as investments, right? They might go vacation a week or 2 or 4 or 6 weeks. You can use it. It's yours. You use it as much as you want, right? But 2, 3, 4 weeks a year, people go vacation. And the rest of the time, they've got it in the Best Western rental program and it cash flows for them, right? So it's this diversified, it's this offshore, globally diversified, hard asset real estate. You have title to it. You own it, right? You have fee simple title, strata title, because it's a condo, right? But you have title to a beautiful condominium that's in a Best Western branded community, 3 blocks off the water, in Belize. And so, something like that, that's more of a head decision. Yeah, maybe you want to fly down and check it out, make sure it's really there. I mean, I'm a big fan of buy what you see too, right? Hop on a plane, go for a long weekend. Yep, it's there. I see it. They look pretty. I see lots of people at the swimming pool and, there's activity. Great. I think, you can own an investment that way. But when it's a lifestyle decision, rent for 3 to 6 months, see how it feels. If you love it after 3 to 6 months, make the transaction, buy a home, buy a condo, build a home, whatever. If you don't like it, chances are there's another community somewhere else that'll be a better fit for you, because, different strokes for different folks, right?
Yep. No, I totally agree. So last time you mentioned, we talked about surprises that people probably aren't thinking about, and we mentioned hot water. What other surprises do you find that people just say, oh, I wish I'd known that?
Well, it's funny, when you mentioned that before earlier, I found my consumer resource guide and I found the picture and I said, I got to show this if I got the chance. So I'm glad you brought it back up. Things like hot water, we don't imagine to check for hot water, but this is what you see a lot in Latin America, all over Latin America. You see a cold water pipe coming out of the wall with a Y splitter going up so that the 2 taps up on top have water coming out. But many of the bathrooms in Latin America are simply plumbed for only cold water. There's no hot water heater in the condo or in the house, right? And so what we've done over 26 years, I guess maybe 24 years, it was a year or 2 into starting our business that I started to write down all of the things that I was, either making a mistake, and I made a lot of mistakes and I wrote those down, but also things that we would see. And we created this book called the Consumer Resource Guide. This is an incredible document. And if Kirk, if your folks want to download a copy and they send an email, we'll just make it really easy. moneytree@ecidevelopment.com. If people send me an email and just write consumer guide or something in the subject line, we'll send you the link to download the Consumer Resource Guide. It's a 100-page book. It's not a sales book. It's got the 15 questions we should ask when we buy property overseas. One of which is, should we check for hot water? Yes. How do we check? You get down on your hands and knees and look under the sink, right? But anyway, so it's got 15 questions. It's got some articles that talk about things like we don't know what we don't know. How do we do excellent due diligence overseas? I mean, so just stuff like that. And then I think it has 5 or 6 mini country handbooks. We also produce, 80 to 100-page country handbooks on Belize, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, Panama, El Salvador, Ecuador, and Argentina too, I think. Anyway, and the Consumer Resource Guide has like 10-page, maybe 8-page little country handbooks in there too. So it is a tremendous resource for anybody, at least even thinking about owning a property overseas for lifestyle and or investment. And I know you do investment. Investment's a big thing for the people listening to this. I'm a huge fan of international diversification. And truthfully, BMW, Mitsubishi, and Nestle stock really aren't international diversification. They're all U.S. stocks. I mean, they're on the U.S. stock exchange, right? They are foreign companies, but they're still traditional, big, what I would call almost domestic. I'm a big fan of having physical assets outside your home country, right? Some percentage. 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, pick a number, right? But some part of your nest egg should be in a basket that's not in your home country, and if possible, not in your home country currency. See, then you're starting to get some real diversification, right? And if you can get stuff that's counter-cyclical, one of the things that back in 1999, you know this, I planted a teak plantation in Panama. And started in 98. I bought an old cattle pasture, interviewed a bunch of forestry management companies, was in and out of Panama probably 20 times in 2 years, looking for the property, interviewing companies, hiring the company. We planted 100 acres of teak trees. And I can remember, right across the street here is the Bavarian Inn in Shepherdstown, and the Rotary meets there every Tuesday morning at 7:30. Well, I would walk across, back then I was, living here and walking across to the Rotary. And, at 7 o'clock, the breakfast was served, and at 7:30, the meeting started. But I can remember missing a lot of meetings, right? And you're not allowed to miss meetings when you're in Rotary. So, they were hassling me. Oh, Cobb, you missed another meeting. What were you doing? Like, yeah, I'm down in Panama. We're looking for farms, or we're talking to forestry companies to plant a teak plantation. And I can still remember just people shaking their heads going, you're insane, Cobb. What are you thinking? 25 years? Panama? Are you crazy? And my answer that I came up with after a couple breakfasts, and I'm like, this is nuts. I got to come up with a good answer. The answer I came up with was, in 25 years, I'm either going to A, need the money and be really glad I did this, or in 25 years, I'm not going to need the money and I'm going to be really glad I did this. Well, Kirk, it's been 22 years, almost 23 years now. And you know what? My trees are, this big around, and I don't know how 50, 80 feet tall. I don't know. They're big. I mean, they're giant teak trees, right? We have a teak forest now. And in 3-4 years, we're going to cut them down, and we're going to have a huge harvest. And then we're going to replant them. And the next harvest, 25 more years, that's about, whatever, call it 30 years from now, right? My daughters will get the proceeds from that harvest. And then it's going to get replanted. And my grandchildren will get the proceeds from that harvest, right? And so teak has long been, teak's a great story because it's been farm raised for about 300 years. And mostly the uber wealthy, the family offices, Harvard and a bunch of the educational endowments, they've invested in timber, right? Timber's a great asset class, but for up until about now, you had to be super wealthy to be able to do it, right? But we were able to go in and do 100 acres. We've added more teak farms now. We've added probably another, 400 or 500 acres of teak to our holdings. And we break them up into quarter-acre parcels, right? And they're under 10,000. I think they're under 7,000. I think it's like 68, 80. Because $7,000, you can own a quarter-acre of land, again, titled property with teak on it, and it becomes a mechanism for generational wealth stewardship, right? Again, it's a 25-year cash flow cycle, and that's why I did it. And Kirk, I'm really glad I did it. I mean, here we are almost to harvest, and giant trees, and it's pretty exciting. But I'm not sure how I got off on teak. I'm sorry. I chased a rabbit trail around, but I'm excited about I guess it's a form of diversification, right? It's a true hard asset diversification outside my home country. And I think people should at least be thinking about that, whether or not they move overseas, have some assets, outside your home country and outside your home currency if possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a good diversification tool. In the interest of time, we got to wrap it up here, but I did want to point out that Mike and I go to President's Week every year in November,
Yes.
and it's a conference this week. This year it's in Las Vegas,
Yep.
and the conference is really centered around all this sort of thing. It's centered around second citizenships, wealth protection,
Yes.
wealth building. You could probably speak to it more than I can, Mike, but it's really a wonderful way to get an inroads into this sort of thing. So if you're interested in this, it's got really everything you need and all the professionals and resources you need to really get introduced to this sort of community. And there's lots of people that have already done it, so you get some real life experiences from people. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit, Mike, before we wrap up.
Yeah, and I know we're down to the last couple of minutes, but thank you for remembering to bring that up. President's Week, this is a 26th year. So 26 years, Joel Nagel, asset protection attorney, international asset and tax attorney, has been doing this. And a couple of things I really like about this event. One, it's very high end. a lot of conferences are $99 or, $399 or whatever. This conference is $2,500 person. I think it maybe, whatever, less for a couple, but I mean, it's that kind of price point. But what they do different from any other event that I've ever attended is they include all meals, all events for speakers and attendees. And it's limited to a very small number of attendees. 30 attendees is the max number of attendees. And so all of a sudden, and then the dates are November 12th through 16th. So what's that? Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, like 4.5 days, right? And so for 4.5 days, you get to actually have all your meals, all your events with your colleagues, the other folks who are attending the conference, right? But also all of the speakers. And that really allows for meaningful dialogue, right? And to really see if this is something, any one of these ideas you might maybe, hey, look, maybe you're looking for international tax advice or offshore asset protection, or maybe you're thinking about diversifying. Or Kirk, you come in and talk about what I would call more traditional investments, that are certainly not so traditional, right? I mean, and I think that's really an important thing, wealth management tools and processes, right? But if you can actually come and spend, 3 days with Kirk, right, where you get to have dinner with them or breakfast with them or whatever, like you're going to have conversations that are meaningful. And all the feedback over the years, that's been the biggest feedback. People appreciate that intimate contact with the people who are experts in their areas to be able to have significant conversations. Last year, we had Ron Paul as our keynote speaker. And again, people actually got to spend some time with Ron Paul. Like normally I go to Freedom Fest and these other events, and you've been to some of the big ones too, Kirk. I mean, there are 1,000 people there and Ron Paul speaks, and maybe you get the chance to slip up beside him and take a quick selfie and say hi, but like, whoopee, like who cares, right?
Yeah,
But
I was literally sitting at the dinner table, having dinner with him, having a conversation with the guy.
Yeah,
It was
right.
it was awesome. It was
Yeah,
really
and it
cool.
wasn't just you, it was attendees. So it's not
Right.
like, oh, just the speakers get to hang out with Ron Paul. The attendees do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
In that, I mean,
It
that's
was very cool. Yeah, it
it
was
is.
it was an experience I can't, you can't compare to anything else.
Yeah. And I can tell you that Joel's got a couple big heavy hitters lined up. They haven't all confirmed yet, but look, we know it all in advance, and we'll send out the information. Same email, moneytree@ecidevelopment.com. Write President's Week in the subject line, or if you've already asked for the consumer guide, consumer guide and President's Week, whatever. We'll make sure you get the information about it. Some really, really important, political speakers, philosophical speakers like a Ron Paul, but then a lot of very practical speakers like you and I, and tax attorneys and other people who really can talk very specifically about strategies and ideas that again are meaningful to the folks who come to the conference. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean and just because I know Ron Paul, for a lot of people, he's great, and some people might not have the same feeling, but there are people out there. I mean, there are ambassadors to certain countries that are coming. I mean, it truly is. If you're interested in this at all, it's a great introduction into the theme. It's literally, I've learned so much. Just I've spoken at a few of these events, but just like listening to other speakers, like, wow, I never even thought of that country. Like maybe I should look into it more. So
Right.
it's really a wonderful conference, and as Mike said, it's a close-knit community. It's small, it's intimate. Rich Checken and I did an intimate fireside chat about inflation a few weeks ago, and it's a good group of people that you can just sit down and just have a conversation with. None of this salesy kind of stuff. It's just like two people having a beer together. So
Exactly.
yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Mike. But we'll definitely have that information in the show notes to reach out to Mike, and we'll have more information about the conference coming up in the next few months for those who are interested. So yeah, Mike, where can people find more about you as we wrap it up here?
Well, anything people want, obviously ECIdevelopment.com, but we love to know that they came from you. So if they just shoot a note to moneytree@ECIdevelopment.com, we'll make sure you get whatever information you're asking for. And if you just want more general information about our company, we've got the Overseas Investment Guide, we've got the Citizenship and Residency Guide. Again, these are resource materials. They're not sales documents. These are actual resource documents like white papers that really provide a ton of information for people looking at kind of anything and everything offshore, residency, investment, and then the consumer resource guide. So yeah, reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and help you, start the conversation and start the process. Or if you're already moving down that road, just finding out why you're thinking about what you're thinking about. And, if there's a way that we can help, that would be great. But these resources are free. So request the resources. They're tremendous.
Great. Well, thanks again for coming on, joining us, Mike, and sharing your wisdom with us. And we'll definitely have you back in the future.
Yes, indeed. Thanks, Kirk.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute. But before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room. All right. Well, that was a great interview with Mike. Really appreciate him coming on the show once again. Always enjoy having him on the show. He's just a wealth of information when it comes to international living, especially when it comes to international real estate. But now we're into the panel portion of the show. So we have our very own Barb Friedberg. Hey, Barb.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Great to have you. And also we have our very own Megan Gorman. Hey, Megan.
Hi, Kirk. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. All right. So let's start with you, Megan. What are some of your takeaways from the interview this week?
Well, I thought it was an interesting interview, and it brings up a lot of what I'm seeing, right? Because when you think international, there's a lot of topics we can talk about. But I have found over the last 2 to 3 years, more and more of my clients are looking to go overseas and establish residency and or citizenship all around the world. And so, the first time I have a client doing it, you're sort of like a little overwhelmed and trying to figure it out. But what you find is there is a lot of process around out there about having people move overseas. And so a lot of my clients have been considering what they call a golden visa program. And these are programs that allow someone either through investment and spending time there to become either a resident of a country or a citizen of a country. Now, why do other countries want to offer this? Well, they want US money coming into those countries to buy land, to improve properties. And for the Americans who want to take advantage of it, they're looking for certain things. They're looking for a better lifestyle, right? Life in the US has gotten very expensive. They're looking for healthcare, right? Overseas, healthcare is often an easier way to get access to it. I've had people doing it because they're considering education options, right? One of the countries that is eligible on the Golden Visa program is Ireland. And Ireland has a lot of great institutions, Trinity College right there in Dublin. And so if you are a citizen or a resident of Ireland, it's pretty much a free ride to college. And then obviously, and I don't want to get too far into this, but a lot of people are struggling with the political climate in the US. And so you're seeing more and more people look overseas in order to establish residency there. And I'll be honest, I see that the largest group of people who are considering it from that perspective are my gay and lesbian families, just because, again, they are concerned about their rights here in the US and so are considering other countries. So golden visa programs are very trendy right now. They're very interesting. And what I would tell anyone considering it is that you really should take your time and think about this. Most programs require you to purchase property in the country in question. And different countries have different amounts. I think Ireland is €1,000,000, whereas when I was doing this in Portugal, it was about €500,000. And so you have to meet certain requirements in order to qualify for these visa programs. I've had people be successful with it, but it is a very long-term choice, right? This is not something you do by whim or fancy. It's because you are committed to being in those countries over the long term. So it's a really interesting sort of trend that we're seeing. But again, it's not something you should just do on a whim or fancy.
Yeah, no, I agree. I appreciate that, Megan. So Barb, what were some of your takeaways?
It made me think about international investing because most of us suffer from something called recency bias, which is we think about what's happened recently and then we project it into the future. Investing, that is a bad thing because investing is cyclical. And we all want diversification because when some sectors or markets drop, hopefully the other ones will buoy us up. Obviously, that's not nearly the case right now in 2022, but this is an anomaly. This is a very rare scenario. In general, investing internationally is giving you access to 40% of past the US investing. So if you don't invest, if you only invest in the US, you're missing 40% of the world, which includes many fast-growing developing companies. And yeah, recently the international investments haven't kept up with the US markets, but think about the 2010s. You got 6% better returns in your international portfolio than you did in the US. Think about the 1980s. In the 1980s, the US returned an average of 14.8% per year from 81 to 90. You think that's awesome? International returns were 21% a year for a 6% difference. So it's really important to consider your overall diversification. Actually, Vanguard suggests having 20% of your stock allocation diversified internationally.
Barb, can I just jump in here? Because I think you bring up a good point, right? About international investing. And I think it's not just equities that you should be thinking about. We've talked, I know we've talked numerous times about the concept of core complement when building out an asset class. And I think this is very true in bonds or fixed income, right? Typically, we do focus on US-based bonds in US portfolios. But if your core holding is either tax-free munis or taxable high credit quality bonds, and you complement that by different bond funds like mortgage-backed bonds, TIPS, floating rate, one of the complements that you should also consider are international bonds, right? Bonds from countries like Germany, Switzerland, the UK, Japan. And I'm not saying that you want to go out and buy the individual bonds from those countries, but there are a lot of great bond funds out there that have reasonable expense ratios that can give you exposure to those countries as well. And it's really, really important to focus on staying in the high credit quality of those countries, but getting more exposure there diversifies your bond portfolio even more. And so I would tell you most of my portfolios in our fixed income allocation, we're about 2 to 3% international bonds. You look shocked by that, Barb.
Now, I am a little shocked because I follow a lot of, in particular, robo-advisor portfolios, which are managed, diversified portfolios that are offered by a variety of different financial companies.
Mhm.
And these are general, well-diversified portfolios. And of those, very few of them have allocation to international bonds. So I'm not saying it's a good or it's a bad strategy, but my question is, does it really add that much to an already diversified portfolio? And my response is, I'm not sure.
But I would make
don't
the
know.
argument on the robo side. I've always been shocked that they often have high yield or junk bonds as an allocation in a lot of the robo
Yeah,
portfolios.
yeah.
And I would argue, if I'm going to take risk, I want to take risk in the equity market, not the bond market, right? So I think it comes down to, what I think at a certain point, it's a personal choice what you want in your portfolio. I'm very comfortable having international bonds. Again, it's not a very large allocation at all. And I'm not a big believer that everything that's in the robo world actually works for a portfolio. I've had in my portfolios for years, floating rate, mortgage backed, international. I think you need to have diversification. But I think robo advisors are like vanilla ice cream in a way, right? Everybody likes vanilla ice cream. It works for everybody, but other people like other things in their ice cream, and that's okay.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, and I just do have to stop you on one point. They actually are not. There's a tremendous sphere of diversification within the managed robo portfolios. So I just want to put that out there. But back to the international bond, diversification is important, and literally, the question is, how much diversification do you want or need? And I'm not saying yay or nay to the international bonds. I really don't have a strong feeling one way or the other. And I think they may be absolutely fine for certain investors. I'm just saying I don't know that they're necessarily a requirement for all investors. Whereas I think US and international stocks should be a requirement for all investors, if I can make
that I agree with that completely.
Okay, great. So yeah, so I think we batted this topic around. Kirk, what's next?
Yeah, no, I think I wanted to point out a few other things for investors, because I think we live in a US centric world. I mean, we definitely do have some international listeners here listen to the show, but most of them are certainly in the US, and people in the US tend to be US centric, right? It's how we view the world. And we have this, I don't want to call it unique, but as we're the world's reserve currency, we do have a unique status. And most people in the world, especially in Europe, they're accustomed to working within different currencies. So they may be working with, the euro and the yen or the won, or, there's so many different currencies, especially before the euro really took hold in Europe. Each of these countries, they had their own currency. And so they were you used to see these currency trading booths in the airport all the time, and it was just commonplace. So I think it's more built into their core of getting used to the fact that different currencies have different valuations compared to other currencies. And here in the US, we don't really look at things that way as much. I know some people do because they do a lot of international traveling, but most of us don't. So we kind of look at the world and we don't even think about currency. And yet currency is such an enormous part of this international investing piece, right? So if you look at something like, I'm just trying to bring it up here. If you look at Japan, and Japan has certainly, if you just look at the Japan ETF, it has certainly not done well this year. I don't know what it's down. It's down maybe 15%, maybe 20%. But if you look at the hedged version, which basically hedges against currency, it's actually up for the year. I think it's up maybe like 3 percentage points. So if you look at the difference between and I'll just name the ETFs because I think it's a reference point. One is DXJ is the Wisdom Tree Japan Hedged Equity Fund, and then you have the EWJ, which is the MSCI Japan ETF. So that one is not hedged. and you look at the difference, it's an enormous difference in performance. And it's mostly due to the currency, right? So if you hedge out, the yen and the currency movements that it's having, you have a very different performance number than for the equities than if you're actually just taking it straight. So I just point that out because it's when you're investing internationally, there are a lot more factors that come into play. It's not just equities. The equities in Japan are doing fine. If you could tell from the hedged version, they're actually up. They're doing great this year. But if you take out the currency part, if you include the currency part, then you're not doing very well at all. So I think it's important just to notice the enormous difference between the two. And that is just something you have to be aware of, because the US dollar has been extremely strong this year. And, that's going to impact international investing. Now, the fact that it's been strong doesn't mean it's going to continue to be strong, right? There could be a point where it starts to weaken, and that also impacts returns. So what I would suggest listeners do is most international indexes also have a hedged version. I know Wisdom Tree does a great job at this. There are some other ones that do it as well, but they have hedged versions that hedge out the currency risk. And look at those and compare that to the index, and I think you'll notice which countries are strong and which are weak. And so I think knowing about currency and how it works, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be a Forex trader and be an expert, because that's a whole nother ball of wax that not very many people do well. But I would suggest understanding how it works. So if you look at the dollar, there's UUP and UDN, I think, are the up and the down version. Just see how it's performing, right? Just see, is it strong or is it weak? And then look at the indexes and saying, all right, how is this going to impact my international investing? So I think that's just an important thing to keep track of. Also, obviously, we're not breaking any new ground here with the war in Ukraine and what's going on with Russia and the impacts that's going to have on Europe. But I do think that if you look back decades, there are strong decades where international clearly outperforms the US. And there are decades where the US clearly outperforms international. And this is very similar to the topic we talked about in the past, where it's growth versus value. Value is underperformed for over a decade. And it doesn't mean it's not valid anymore. It just means that growth was just the more favorable asset class for reasons that we've talked about before, which is low interest rates. But now interest rates are climbing, value is probably going to be outperforming growth by a large margin. So, there are periods where there's outperformance and underperformance. And unless you're really on top of the ball, I think that's why Megan and Barb were talking about it, why it's really important to have international exposure, because you can't time the markets. I think, I look at the world a little differently in that, it's more of a macro perspective, but I think for most investors, it's a really wise move to invest, to diversify internationally, because there is a lot of growth. There's a lot of global GDP that comes out of other countries than the US. I know we think we're all the center of the universe, but we're not. So it's just important just to know about it and know how it impacts you. So as we I want to touch on one more topic here. And I want to start with you, Megan, because I know you have a lot of high net worth people, but how, do you have, do a lot of your investors either live or travel internationally, or even have aspirations to live internationally? Because this is kind of a small segment of our population, but I think it's definitely important to at least think about, because a lot of people don't like the direction of the US right now, and they are exploring that path. So what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, as I said with the golden visas, there's a lot of reasons why people are looking to be overseas. I do have people more than ever buying overseas, from places from Costa Rica to Portugal to Ireland to Sicily to Tanzania. I mean, you name it, we're probably buying a house there with somebody. And it's complicated to do it, right? As I said earlier with the golden visas, you have to really think this through. These are different legal systems. So for instance, dealing in Italy, you have to know the system. You got to know you have to know the right people to get the transaction through, because you need certain types of notaries, certain types of stamps on the property transaction. The money has to move in a certain way. You need a certain type of person to insure the property. It isn't like it is here in the US. And so you need to be prepared for that. In contrast, places like Costa Rica, a lot of times you're buying as a corporation and people hold their houses as a corporation. So you need to understand what the transaction should look like in that country. And then you have to figure out the income tax consequences here in the US, right? So if you're going to own a property overseas that you use a couple weeks a year, but you also rent out, I have a lot of people who do this in Mexico, particularly in Cabo. How does that work on your tax return? What are the issues? Are there any additional filings you're going to need to do? What should you make sure you do? You have to be proactive on the tax front. And then I would also say on the estate planning front, you need to also consider whether getting a document in that country will help with probate of your estate. So for instance, I have a client who just bought a property in the UK, and we are going to have a simple will in the UK to help handle that property that will work with their California revocable trust. And so again, it's thinking through all these different issues in buying properties overseas.
Okay. Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Megan. All right. So as we wrap it up here, final thoughts from you, Barb?
I actually had a follow-up question
Yeah.
for you, Kirk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is there a rule of thumb regarding international investment mutual funds and ETFs? Is it generally better to go with a hedged version or the non-hedged version, or is there not a rule of thumb for that issue?
I think it's a great question. So I'll just tell you a bit about my process, and I think that might help answer it, because I don't know that there's necessarily a rule of thumb. So I think one of the benefits of having 50 million ETFs now, like there's an ETF for everything. I mean, there's an ETF that shorts Kathy Woods, for God's sake. So
I know
there's one for everything nowadays.
No.
So, when you see that, so there's a lot of ETFs out there, which I think are great ideas. And I'll give you an example. If you look at like the S&P 500, it is market cap weighted. And a lot of people object to that because they think, well, why should Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, these big tech companies, why should they dominate the performance of the S&P 500? It doesn't make sense because there's like 5 companies, and I don't know what it is now, but at one point I think it was like 20% of the return of the S&P 500 in 5 companies. Like 1% takes like out of 500 companies. It's crazy. So I think philosophically people came up with a strategy to equally weight. So rather than market cap weight, they thought, oh, well, what if we equally weight it? And I think it's a good idea, right? I think, but to me, I look at that and say, it's a great idea. I love it. It's never going to take hold because, it may take hold, but probably not because, people tend to do what they're accustomed to, right? The recency bias. Oh, I did this, so I'm going to keep doing it. But I use them for tracking purposes. So if I want to look at the S&P and say, all right, here's how the S&P is performing, and I'll compare that to the equally weighted version, and I'll say, all right, and I'll give you some examples. RSP is an equally weighted version. So I just look at them and say, all right, how is that performing? And so I can tell pretty quickly, like, where is that performance coming from? Is it coming from those 5 companies, or is it coming from something else? So I don't invest in the equally weighted, not because it's not a good idea, but because this is going to get into like second and third level thinking here. But if you want to invest in something, that's, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea is one thing. But then the follow-up is, what is everybody else doing? Because if I'm investing in the equal weight, but everyone else is investing in the S&P, which is positively reinforcing the biggest companies like, Apple, Microsoft, Google, all those, then they're getting bigger and they're putting more pressure on pushing that market cap weighted index higher. So it's a positive reinforcement loop, right? So more money going to big tech means more money is going into big tech is effectively what happens, which pushes it up, which means more people want to put money in it. So I think about it from that perspective of how is this going to impact it? And the equal weight won't get that same impact. So in the last few years, when tech was, raging because of COVID and everyone was putting money in it, that would have been the better place to be, was something more heavier in that. But if you're lightening that, then you're not getting the same impact. Now, with a recession, it might be the reverse, right? Right now we have higher interest rates. Tech tends to get hurt a little bit more with higher interest rates, which means that maybe the equally weighted would be a better place to be, right? So, and I'm not saying it is or isn't, I'm just using this as an example, because I think it's really important to recognize that there are different ways to invest. So I use Japan as an example. I think Japan is a really interesting play. It's very undervalued. The currency is really the biggest impact here. The currency is just getting destroyed. And I think, a lot of international countries are going to have to start raising rates soon, which is going to have a huge problem, especially in Japan. So Japan's actually as somebody called it, they're a bug in search of a windshield. And there's some definite challenges there that come up with their currency, because they have so much debt, you can't raise rates. And we in this country have a similar problem, although not as bad as Japan. So, I think it's just, I make these points just to bring up the different perspectives that you can have on this. And I think it just comes down to which is the better version. If you think Japan's a great investment and you really worry about the currency, use the hedge version. If you think that the currency is going to go in your favor, then use the regular version, right? So it's a thesis that you have to determine yourself. But I like the fact that there are so many choices that you can actually make these determinations and choose, hey, I want to invest internationally, but I really don't trust the currency change. So you can just remove it, right? The US dollar is strong. Well, maybe it's going to drop, or maybe it's going to keep going higher. I don't know. I'm not an expert in currency. Let me just remove it from the equation. I'll invest in the hedge version. Then I have my straight thesis of I like the country, it's going to grow. Simple, right? So that's the good thing about these ETFs is they do allow you to simplify your investing if you choose to go that way.
Great. Well, you've certainly covered that issue. And my final thoughts are international investing is an important part of your portfolio. And another cherry on top of the international investing sundae is, at present, especially emerging markets funds in general, the diversified index fund versions at least have extremely high yields. So even if you're not getting a ton of capital appreciation right now, because the global environment might still be reeling from supply chain issues from the war in Ukraine, you will be paid to wait with these very, very high dividend yields on emerging market index funds. So I am Barbara Friedberg. You can find me at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance, YouTube, and Robo-Advisor Pros. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks for coming on, Barb. Megan, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I think you guys hit all the investing aspects of it, but I think buying property overseas is fascinating. And I've seen a lot of people do it and be incredibly happy with the investment they've made. But I think as long as you go into it with eyes wide open, that the system is not like the US, that there are tax considerations along with estate planning considerations, it can be a really, really amazing experience. So I'm Megan Gorman. You can find me at Forbes.com/Megan Gorman. Thanks for having me on, Kirk.
Thanks for coming on, Megan. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.